Occupied Iran, the peace the regime cannot survive. Occupied Iran is not a country choosing war. Occupied Iran is a country trapped beneath rulers who need crisis to survive. A ceasefire may hold, talks may remain open, the blockade may continue, ships may be seized in Hormuz. But the central struggle is not only between Tehran and Washington. The central struggle is inside the regime. Western commentary often describes this moment as a choice between war and peace. That misses the real structure. For the Islamic occupiers ruling Iran, the real choice is between external pressure and internal exposure. War can be narrated. War can be blamed on outsiders. War can justify repression, censorship, arrests, and fear. War allows the regime to rename failure as resistance. A coerced agreement does the opposite. A coerced agreement reveals weakness. It assigns responsibility. It tells the regime's security class that 40 years of defiance did not end in victory, but in retreat. That is why the regime may prefer crisis to closure. Not because it can win a major war, not because it can outlast every adversary, but because controlled confrontation delays political reckoning. For a normal state, war is an instrument of strategy. For a decaying revolutionary regime, war becomes an instrument of rule. It suspends accountability. It pushes economic pain onto society. It turns repression into state policy under the cover of emergency. This is the first point policymakers must understand. The regime's appetite for confrontation is not proof of strength. It is evidence that confrontation may be the only governing method left. The blockade matters because it compresses time. Sanctions weaken a regime gradually. A blockade disrupts revenue, shipping, imports, foreign currency, and the networks that finance coercion. This is not only pressure on Iran's economy. This is pressure on the regime's ability to fund obedience. The Islamic occupiers can tolerate poverty imposed on Iranians. They have demonstrated that for years. What they cannot tolerate easily is pressure that weakens the coercive state itself. Because this regime does not survive on ideology alone, it survives on patronage, security budgets, procurement, armed loyalty, and the steady financing of repression. The second point is fragmentation. Since Khamenei's death, the system has not simply become weaker, the system has become exposed. Khamenei was the final referee. He could absorb the political cost of retreat and force others to accept it. Without that figure, the regime does not become more pragmatic. The regime becomes less capable of deciding. Every faction can demand resistance. Every faction can accuse another of betrayal. No faction wants to sign the document that rivals may later define as surrender. In that environment, escalation becomes easier than decision. Seizing ships is easier than accepting terms. Threatening Hormuz is easier than admitting that the doctrine of resistance has reached its limit. That is why the most likely path is not immediate total war. The more likely path is calibrated crisis. Enough disruption to create leverage, enough tension to justify repression, and enough ambiguity to delay a final choice. Iran is not the Islamic Republic. The Iranian people are not the regime. Iran is a nation and a civilization. The regime is a coercive apparatus that has exhausted the country and claimed ownership over it. Western policy must hold that line with discipline. The goal is not to wound Iran. The goal is to deny the Islamic occupiers the ability to hide behind Iran. Do not mistake defiance for confidence. Do not mistake negotiation for moderation. Do not mistake endurance rhetoric for strength. The regime does not fear pressure alone. The regime fears what pressure reveals. The regime fears the moment when peace asks the question that war has concealed for decades. Why did you bring the country here? That is the question the regime cannot answer. Occupied Iran today is not stable, not secure, and not resolved. Occupied Iran is a nation held beneath rulers who fear peace more than conflict. Because the regime can explain war, the regime can exploit war, the regime can govern through war. What the regime cannot easily survive is the peace that proves it lost. Until next time, be well. Let freedom reign. Long live Iran.